Hamas publishes a new video showing 2 live Israeli hostages, a day after Israeli officials are quoted suggesting that another hostage may have died in captivity. The IDF has moved ground forces into the northern parts of Gaza. Hamas fires 10 rockets towards southern Israel. Meanwhile, the water lines to Gaza City have reportedly been disconnected, deepening the disastrous humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. I'm Alon Burstein. Let's dive in. On Saturday, April 5th, Hamas published a hostage video showing 2 live Israeli hostages, Maxim Harkin and Bar Burstein. In the 2.5-minute video, the two are seen sitting together in a tunnel. Harkin does most of the talking. He begins by relating to the recent IDF airstrikes in the Gaza Strip, stating that he had been allowed to go up and breathe fresh air for the first time and see the stars. However, then the IDF began bombing the area where he was held. Both him and Burstein say that the only reason they are alive is due to a miracle and to the fact that the Hamas captors protected them during the IDF bombing. They point to several light injuries that Harkin has, stating that these are the result of IDF airstrikes in his area. Harkin states that they have lost all hope of seeing their families or daylight again, and asks the Israeli public to apply pressure on the Israeli government to get to a deal that will bring them home. Burstein then states that while Israel is stating that it is applying military pressure on Hamas, the pressure is in effect killing the hostages. He adds that where they are kept in the Gaza Strip is no longer safe, and specifically emphasizes that the food and water supply are running out. Harkin then appeals to a hostage. He states the hostage by name, however the name is blocked out in the audio, stating that he was held with them, however he was released in the previous deal, and reminding him of how bad they looked and how starved they were when he was released. However, saying since then, due to the deal and the entrance of humanitarian aid, they are now again starting to recover. However, now, with the cutting off of humanitarian aid, they are again facing food shortages and are in a dire situation. The video ends like all previous hostage videos with a fade out on the screen stating in Hebrew, English, and Arabic that the hostages will only return in a hostage deal, and then an hourglass showing that time is running out. Relating to the hostages, there are 2 more reports from the last several days. First, echoing the statements that were made by the hostages in the video, on April 4th, Al-Qassam spokesperson Abu Ubaida issued a statement that roughly half of the living Israeli hostages are held in areas in the Gaza Strip where the IDF has recently ordered Palestinians to evacuate, i.e. areas that are going to see more intensive IDF bombings and possible active fighting on the ground. And he urged the Israeli government to return to negotiations rather than risking the lives of the hostages, who he explicitly stated are going to still be held in those areas. Without getting into speculation regarding if Hamas is telling the truth about whether the hostages are kept or not, I will just say that it is noteworthy that if Hamas's military wing spokesperson is echoing the statements that were made in the hostage video that Hamas just published, clearly this is one of the strategies that Hamas is trying to then put out to the government, whether it's true or not, saying that hostages are the ones who are going to be endangered as a result of the IDF airstrikes. A second report from April 4th relates to statements that were made by a, quote, senior Israeli official, which is very typically code for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu himself, that were quoted in several different Israeli news sources. Among the different statements that were made, there was an important reference to the hostages when the senior official, quote-unquote, stated that out of the 59 hostages in the Gaza Strip, 36 of them are dead and their bodies are held in Gaza, and that what is known to Israel is that 21 are alive. Now, this is important because it differs from Israel's official numbers. Officially, out of the 59 hostages in Gaza, Israel has declared that 35 of them are dead, so possibly Israel is now suggesting that one more either has been killed during the fighting in the Gaza Strip or as a result of being executed by Hamas, or possibly was kidnapped when he was already dead. And also Israel has officially been treating 24 of them as though they are alive. Now, it's also important to note that many of the released hostages from the previous deal gave life signs of between 20 and 21 out of the 24 hostages. However, this statement now suggests that Israel is possibly confirming that 36 of the hostages are dead. Israel is confirming that 21 are alive, and the country possibly does not know the fate of the remaining 2 hostages. It is important to note that Israel has demanded that as part of a future deal, Hamas begins by confirming how many hostages are alive. However, the group has thus far refused to do so. I will also say, in relation to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, it is also important to note that the Prime Minister is currently in the United States and will be meeting with U.S. President Trump on Monday, April 7th. Officially, this hastily planned meeting has more to do with the newly imposed U.S. tariffs that also impose tariffs on Israel. However, it is important to note that the special U.S. envoy to the region, Steve Witkoff, is going to be joining the meeting for at least part of the meeting between the Prime Minister and the President, indicating that the hostage situation is very likely also going to be discussed, and possibly there will be pressure by Trump to move forward towards a deal. Possibly not. Obviously remains to be seen. We will learn more soon. Turning to the latest developments in the Gaza Strip. In the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, after on April 3rd, the IDF issued evacuation orders to Palestinians in the Saja'iyah and Tufts regions of Gaza City. On April 4th, it was reported that the IDF has begun moving ground forces into Saja'iyah. Saja'iyah is a neighborhood in the northeastern parts of Gaza City. It is one of Hamas's very strong key strongholds that the IDF had very intensive fighting in the last two rounds that it invaded northern Gaza since the war began. Major airstrikes were reported alongside this invasion. The military reported that it is destroying Hamas infrastructure and command centers, adding that Hamas operatives have been killed in the attacks. On April 5th, major artillery fire was also reported in the Tufts region of Gaza City, that is more in the central parts of Gaza City, right around here, indicating very likely that the IDF intends to expand its activity to that area in the coming days. Meanwhile, in the southern parts of the Strip, the IDF has continued to carry out major attacks throughout Han Yunis. Major airstrikes were reported on April 5th and April 6th in the western parts of the city, and in the Amal areas, that is in the areas over here, and Amal is more north areas over here. The military is also continuing to excavate and expand the Morag corridor. This is the new security corridor that the IDF is establishing, that is going to be the third security corridor that the IDF intends to maintain in the Gaza Strip. According to reports, the IDF has not explicitly said where this is going to be, but according to reports on the ground of Palestinians, but where the IDF activity is currently going on, it is likely going to be right around this juncture over here, cutting straight across and going all the way to the sea, adding this corridor over here between Han Yunis and Rafah, which will add to the corridor of the Philadelphia corridor and the Netzarim corridor that is up here. In addition to that, it was reported that the IDF is carrying out quote-unquote flattening operations. Those are operations where the IDF comes in and after evacuating an area of Palestinians, essentially flattens a neighborhood in order to create a sterile zone of control. According to reports, the recent quote-unquote flattening activity has gone on in the Kizan Rashwan area in southwestern parts of Han Yunis, so that is in this area over here. Possibly the IDF is starting from this area and going this way. Obviously remains to be seen. We will see if the IDF does report when it has completed that corridor, if this is going to be a corridor that Palestinians are allowed to even move through or not. We will learn more as things develop. Relating to the central parts of the Gaza Strip, on April 6th, 10 rockets were fired from the Deir el-Balah areas in central Gaza, that is this area over here, targeting the areas in southern Israel and the Shfilah. Primarily rockets targeted the areas of Ashdod, Gan Yavne, and Ashkelon. So if we turn to this map, this is the Gaza Strip, and rockets targeted the areas of Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Gan Yavne, right around there. 7 people were reportedly injured from shrapnel in these attacks, and others were more lightly injured. The Al-Qassam brigades, the military wing of Hamas, claimed responsibility for those rockets. Shortly after, the IDF issued evacuation orders to neighborhoods in Deir el-Balah, ordering Palestinians in those areas to head southward. This includes the neighborhoods of As-Sahaba, As-Samah, Al-Adwa, Al-Zawayda, as well as As-Salah, all in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. Hours after that, substantial airstrikes were reported in the areas of Deir el-Balah, and I say this is noteworthy in addition to the fact that this is what's happening in central Gaza, because Deir el-Balah in the central parts of the Strip is the only major city in Gaza that the IDF did not carry out an active ground invasion since the war began. Many rumors have suggested that this is due to the fact that the military's intelligence indicates that many of the hostages may be held in this area, so it remains to be seen if the IDF will continue to target Deir el-Balah or if this was a more isolated incident in response to those rockets. Obviously, we'll learn more about that in the coming days. More broadly, in addition to that rocket attack is very significant since it constitutes the largest barrage since the return to fighting on March 18th, and more importantly, those rocket attacks are still the only way that Hamas has retaliated to the IDF since return to fighting. It's important to note that Palestinian Islamic Jihad did report engaging the IDF forces in one incident on March 29th in Han Yunis. However, besides that incident, both Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad have concentrated all of their attacks on firing rockets and mortars towards Israel. There have been no reports of Hamas fighters engaging the IDF on the ground throughout the entire Gaza Strip, leaving that rocket fire the only way that Hamas has engaged with Israel at the present time. Obviously, this can change at any time. However, at this point, that remains seemingly the Hamas tactic or strategy for how it is going to engage with Israel while applying pressure on Israel through possibly negotiators and those hostage videos to try to come back to a hostage deal. Before concluding, I'm going to relate to 3 more updates from the past days. First, while not becoming another major arena yet, there are increasing reports that the IDF is carrying out almost daily airstrikes throughout southern Lebanon over the past days, reportedly targeting Hezbollah and other militant operatives in the area. On April 4th, the IDF assassinated Hassan Farhat, he's Hamas's commander of the western regions in southern Lebanon, in an airstrike in Sidon. Reportedly, 3 people were killed in that attack. On April 6th, the IDF airstrikes were reported in the areas of Anakora. Later, it was also reported that a helicopter attack was carried out on a gas station in the areas of Ita Sha'ab. And later in the day again, airstrikes were also reported in the areas of Zabkin. The military stated that the targets were Hezbollah operatives that were attempting to rebuild the organization's infrastructure in that area. A second report in the last several days relates to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. On April 5th, the Gaza City municipality reported that the main water supply line from Israel, which supplies some 70% of the water in the city and surrounding refugee camps, was cut off. Reports suggested that this may have been a malfunction or a result of the fighting rather than a deliberate act that was done from Israel. There was at least no official statement in Israel about cutting off the water, different than when Israel cut off the electrical power to the Gaza Strip. However, the mayor did add that repair units cannot get to the areas to try to locate the problem as a result of the ongoing fighting in the eastern parts of Gaza City, and this reportedly is worsening the humanitarian situation in Gaza City by the hour. A third report that I'm going to say for the last several days relates to the political arena. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu visited Hungary over the past weekend, and on April 6th it was reported that hours after he landed in Hungary, the Hungarian government was given an arrest warrant that was issued for Netanyahu by the ICC, calling for Hungary to honor its agreement with the ICC and the Rome Statute and arrest Netanyahu and bring him to trial in The Hague. Hours later, after reportedly speaking with U.S. President Trump, Hungary publicly withdrew from the Rome Statute and the order was not carried out. However, the important thing to take away from this is that the ICC is seemingly viewing the arrest warrant that it issued for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and presumably also former Defense Minister Gallant quite seriously. I'll say also that Israel also appears to take this seriously, as it was reported that on his way to the United States from Hungary, Netanyahu's plane took a longer route in order to not pass over Ireland, Iceland, or Holland in case of an emergency landing, since Israel does expect that if an emergency landing did happen in those countries, they would actually honor the ICC warrant and arrest Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Those are my highlights from the past recent days on the developments in the Israel-Hamas War. If you find these reports informative, please do remember to send them on to anyone who you think might be interested. Hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications if you want to know when they come out. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.